Carol Lee, what have you learned? Have you learned anything more about this?
Well, Andrea, we're learning, my colleague Mike Memoli and I are reporting that as part of this Justice Department review of the classified documents in President Biden's possession, they've interviewed multiple Biden staffers, those who worked for him in those closing days of his time as vice president, including Kathy Chung, who had served as executive assistant to the president, who's described to us as somebody who would have had a key role in packing up those boxes in those final days of President Biden's term as vice president. Now, what we're told is that those who've been interviewed, they did so when they were asked to be interviewed by federal law enforcement, that they agreed to do so quickly, and that those who were involved in packing up the former vice president's, now president, vice presidential office were not, they were just putting things in boxes, that there was no intent here, that they weren't looking and seeing what exactly was in these papers, that they weren't intentionally putting classified documents commingled with the president's political and personal documents. So we don't know, Andrea, if these interviews are concluded, if federal law enforcement officials are continuing to talk to people who worked for President Biden at that time. But we do know that a number of them have been interviewed, including someone who served as his executive assistant, who now serves in a position at the Pentagon. Andrea?
Carol, I want to drill down on that because this is such an important new fact that you're presenting here of Kathy Chung and how they were putting things in boxes. The fact is that these documents, any classified document, has a big cover page. There's a bright orange strip on them, let's say, or red. They are marked, classified. And anyone who had worked for the vice president for a period of years, they were in the White House for 8 years. I don't know how long Kathy Chung had this job, but they know enough that a classified document cannot be commingled. That was one of the chief criticisms of Donald Trump's procedures when he was packing in a hurry. Carol?
That's right, Andrea, as you well know, and people who work for the vice president are that close to the vice president's papers and in and around his office would then have a security clearance and would be trained on how to handle classified documents. I can read you a quote from one of the sources who told us that the people who were boxing up President Biden's then vice presidential office had no idea that there was anything in there that shouldn't leave the White House. And the source adds, there was no decision made to take certain documents that should have been presidential records or classified. So underscoring here, Andrea, what we've heard from the White House, what the president himself has suggested, which is there was no intent here, which is the thing that the Justice Department would be looking for. They're essentially saying this was an accident. This was not something that the president's aides who were packing up his vice presidential office intended to do.